I know he tells the truth. I just hope he got it right. He meant to tell the truth. But anyway, we discussed that this afternoon. And so I would like to start this evening, since we're getting close to the end of 2 Samuel. We're getting close to the end of David's life. We've been studying his life for a long time. What are some of the remarkable attributes that come to your mind concerning King David? Just some characteristics that pleased God. He didn't always please God, but he did a lot that pleased God. I like that, a soft, tender heart, right? Now, I ask this question because, after all, David is the name most mentioned in the Bible after God or Jesus, all right? And Jesus was more than a man, wasn't he? So, of mere mortals, none mention more than David. Mentioned in both the Old Testament, also in the New Testament, a primary figure along with Abraham and Moses. He did. And that shows something about his obedience, doesn't it? So I like what Sabrina said, the tender heart. June says obedient. He respected God's authority. If God has authorized or ordained this man to be king, then so be it. So he's a man who demonstrated his tenderness of heart in numerous instances. For example, that tender heart and that obedience to God went hand in hand, didn't it? Out of compassion, he would not lift up his hand against Saul, and also out of respect for God. When he sinned, he had a penitent heart, didn't he? And how many times have we bowed our own heads in prayer, repenting of sin, and we pray a similar prayer like that David offered, if not the very words, because that's why such is provided. Restore in me a clean heart. Against Thee and Thee only have I sinned. I'm sure every faithful child of God, when there have been moments where we know we sinned against our God, prayed a similar prayer. And so David became very sensitive about his sin. Dan, I think you were going to make a comment. Just. That fits David. Sure. David's justice. That's his righteousness, isn't it? He did what he thought was right or fair. David would not deliberately mistreat someone. And we're going to see that in our message even tonight. As we think about David being a forgiving man. He had received forgiveness, but he turned around and forgave. What about in chapter 19, the forgiveness he extended to Shimei? Remember what Shimei had determined to do to David when it looked like David was losing control? He turned against him. In my life, I've known some individuals who, they would check who seemed to be on the winning side, and then they might find out at the end they're on the losing side, and they come back, I was wrong, I'm sorry, forgive me. And we see David in his reaction to Shimei, I forgive you, I forgive you. Now, those that were closely advising David said, what? Now's the time to get him back, right? That's how a lot of people think. What do you mean, showing mercy to you? But he did. Remember what he did on behalf of Mephibosheth. Simply because Mephibosheth was the grandson of Saul and the son of Jonathan. I want to show a special act of kindness or grace toward him. And he did. So think about these characteristics. David was a man with a tender and penitent heart, obedient heart. He was a just or righteous man. He had a forgiving spirit. I'm impressed also from his childhood that he was courageous, aren't you? David was a courageous man. When we consider his early life and defeating Goliath, that shows the courage. And he knew where his power, where it originated. It came from God. That's a very, very important point to make. He was a humble man. That's right, he was a humble man. And he would not exercise his position as king until God said it was all right for him to exercise his position as king. He was a humble man. The very opposite of what Saul became. Saul was lifted up with pride. Saul had a envious and murderous heart. David encountered so many obstacles along the way. Could he have been discouraged? It's not could he be discouraged. He was, wasn't he? He got discouraged so often, and yet he didn't give up God. He didn't turn his back on God. And so the Bible is very, very open and plain. He didn't do what Joseph did when met with temptation. He was in a place where he shouldn't have been, where he was allowed to be tempted, and where he did what was wrong. Nathan would come to him, and he would be restored. When Nathan put it right in his face, didn't he? Thou art the man. Well, we're coming to the closing chapters of 2 Samuel, and David is now back on the throne after the threat by Absalom. Now, Absalom, it seemed, might have succeeded, but Absalom was on the wrong side. God's man was David. All right? And so David is restored to his place of prominence. Now, as no doubt you studied last week, after Absalom died and David got that information, like any father, he sank into depression. Now, Absalom had done his father wrong. I mean, just dirty. Absalom was a dirty, rotten scoundrel. But still David's son, right? That was still his child. He loved him from birth. And so it is that there are parents who have heard such horrible words come from their children, such as, I hate you, I don't want anything to do with you. And the parent still says, well, that doesn't change my love for you. It doesn't change my love for you. You're my child. But here was the problem. When the children of the loyal forces to David had won the battle, they were rejoicing because they put David back on the throne, but David was so overcome with grief that he was causing those who put him back on the throne to become disillusioned. Joab had to say something to him about it. You keep grieving over Absalom, but the people are excited. They've won the battle for you. And so David had to come to that understanding that he had to show his appreciation for his loyal following in establishing him once again on the throne. Well, we come to chapter 20 tonight, and the last few chapters of the book, especially 20 and 21, are somewhat out of order chronologically. Okay? This is going to pick up at an earlier time in David's life, and the setting has to do with a man named Sheba, who is an enemy of David. He is one who is loyal to Saul. And so we read in verse 1 that this man Sheba is a son of Belial. And what does that mean? Base fella. He would be looked upon as a worthless kind of fella. And he has no respect whatsoever for David. He said, we have no part in David, neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tent, O Israel. In other words, we're not going to bow down to David. And so every man of Israel went up from after David and followed Sheba, but the men of Judah, they clave unto their king from Jordan even to Jerusalem. So Judah would continue to be the ones who would stay close to God and God's anointed, David. Would Judah outlast Israel? They would, wouldn't they? You know, there's coming the divided kingdom, and both are going to basically be brought to naught, but Israel before Judah. Now, David came to his house, the text says, in verse 3, that's the text. The king took the 10 women, his concubines, whom he'd left to keep the house, and put them in a ward and fed them, but he went not into them. Why? Because of what happened with Absalom. Now these women, these concubines, they were controlled by these men, weren't they? They were controlled by them. And David, I'm sure, recognizes that they were treated almost like property. But David refused to go in unto any of them anymore because of what had taken place with Absalom. And so the text says they became like widows, living in widowhood. They never knew man sexually again. They lived as widows because of what had taken place with Absalom. When Absalom went to the top of the palace and committed his vile act in front of all of Israel on the rooftop of the palace, so that all of Israel would know, I am now on the throne of my father. His concubines, they're mine. Okay? Now, then said the king to Amasa, assemble me the men of Judah within 3 days, and be thou here present. Now, this is interesting to me because Amasa has not been supportive of David. He was working on behalf of whom? Absalom. All right? He was the captain of Absalom's army. But now he has submitted himself, obviously, to David because Absalom is defeated. And instead of Joab being the captain of the army, David gives that job to Amasa. Now that seems like a rather dangerous thing to do. But sometimes when you're uniting power, what do you have to do? Reach out to the friends of my enemy who's been deposed. In order to bring unity, what do? You say, well, here's the fella I defeated. Here are some who were his supporters. They're still respected by his followers. I'm going to reach out to this one and show some unity. All right? Politicians do that oftentimes. Well, the election is over, so I'm going to reach out here to the other side, and I'm going to say, will you come and join my cabinet? Or something like that. And everybody says, well, this is a show of unity. Okay? Something bipartisanship. All right? So here is David putting this man Amasa in charge of his military. Is that a mistake? Yes, it is a mistake. And so Amasa went to assemble the men of Judah, but the text says he tarried longer than the set time which he had appointed him. And therefore David, who is wise in years, the battles have caused him to be filled with wisdom, and he says something's not right about this. He's exercising a lot of caution. And so from David here, we learn that while you try to work with those who used to be your enemies, you better maintain what? Some caution. Because that same one with whom you're shaking hands may have a knife in his hand and coming behind you with it, right? So, David is alert to that. And he says to Abishai, now shall Sheba do more harm than did Absalom. Take thou thy Lord's servants and pursue after him. Now this Sheba, you see, is going to cause problems. David no longer trusts Amasa to do the job. He turns the job over to Abishai, and he says, I want you to go after this Sheba because he could do more harm than Absalom did. Now Sheba's out here stirring up everything against David. David's back on the throne. He's back in the royal city. But here is this man out here still causing a problem. His name is Sheba. And so there went after him Joab's men under Abishai. And it says in verse 8, when they were at the great stone which is in Gibeon, Amasa went before them. There's Amasa. We find him again. And Joab's garment that he had put on was girded unto him, and upon it a girdle with a sword fastened upon his loins in the sheath thereof. And as he went forth, it fell out. Now, let's think about something. When David didn't want to strike someone dead, who did? Joab, right? Joab's a military man through and through. David's a military man, but at the same time, he's a man who has a softer heart. Now, Joab said to Amasa, Art thou in health, my brother? You doing all right? Sure good to see you. Joab took Amasa by the beard with the right hand. Come down here and let me kiss you. Just a friendly kiss. Come down here. Now, I don't know how they did that. I wouldn't pull a man's beard close to me to kiss him for no amount of money, right? But a different culture, wasn't it? Here's and listen, Joab wasn't about to kiss him either. Joab pulls Amasa by the beard. Come down here, let me kiss you, brother. I'm glad to see you. All right? My brother doesn't have a beard. He has a goatee. I don't kiss him. I just hug his neck. But anyway, here is Amasa. He took no heed to the sword that's where? In Joab's hand. Come on here, let me hug your neck. Let me give you a kiss. I'm so glad to see you. So he smote him therewith in the fifth rib. The text says in the King James, shed out his bowels to the ground, and he struck him not again. Just one particular blow is all that it was. Now that was in verse 10. I want to notice that that's from the King James translation. Here is what the New American Standard Version says about that. Amasa was not on guard against the sword which was in Joab's hand, so he struck him in the belly with it, and then the inward parts poured out to the ground. And he didn't strike him again, he died. Awful scene. So this was a severe blow to Amasa. So Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued after Sheba. And one of Joab's men stood by him and said, He that favoreth Joab, and he that is for David, let him go after Joab. That is, let him follow him. Let's go out here and defeat this man Sheba. And so the text says there in verse 12 that Amasa, he's been struck by Joab, wallowed in blood in the midst of the highway. And when the men saw that all the people stood still, he removed Amasa out of the highway into the field. Isn't it good to know that people don't change? I mean, you know, really there's no change in people. Here is Joab, ahead of the host. He kills Amasa. Amasa's lying there in the middle of the road. He's dead. You know what slows things down when there's a bad accident? It's not the accident, but everybody, yeah. I just stop to see what's going on, you know. And you slow down. Just keep on going and the traffic will flow. And you'll stay out of the way of those trying to help. But no, we want to get a good view. Well, you can imagine what it was like here. I mean, here's this man Amasa. They recognize him. He's dead. And so Joab, he just goes over there and pulls him off to the side and covers him with a cloth. We've got to go on. Is that a tough man? I tell you, Joab is tough. He's hard-hearted, but I'll say this, he loves his king, doesn't he? And so Amasa is now dead, and they remove him out of the highway, and after that, everybody went on. Up to that point, everybody came and stood still. Well, when you're just standing still there looking dead body, you're not going to catch the one that you need to catch. So he went through all the tribes of Israel unto a place called Abel. Now, this place is way up north, all right? It's not far from Dan. Have you ever heard the phrase Dan to Beersheba? Dan's way up north, Beersheba's way down south. And so this battle is going on way up in the north. And so he went through all the tribes of Israel unto Abel, and the text says that they were gathered together and went after him, and they came and besieged this place in Abel of Beth-Maachah. And they cast up a bank against the city, and it stood in the trench, and all the people with Joab battered the wall to throw it down. All right? Here's another one of those places that's got a wall. All right? And so they're going to try to tear down the wall. And so, wait a minute. There's going to be a wise woman who cries out, don't do this. She says, first of all, she says of that city, it's one of the mother cities. It's one of the big cities. It's one of the cities that brings glory and honor to our people way up north. You don't want to do this. And so here is this wise woman crying out, Hear, hear, verse 16, I pray you, unto Joab. She recognizes who it is. Joab's known. Come near hither that I may speak with thee. I mean, they're tearing down the walls to get in. For what purpose? Sheba's in there. Okay? Now, he might have gone there. You ever heard of a sanctuary city? Well, that's not what this is. And it's not what this is. When he was come near unto her, the woman said, Are you Joab? You're Joab, aren't you? He said, I'm Joab. She said, Hear the words of thine handmaid. He says, I listen, I'm hearing you. What do you got to say? Then she spake, saying, They were wont to speak in old times, saying, They shall surely ask counsel at Abel. And so they ended the matter. I'm one of them that are peaceable and faithful in Israel. What she's saying is, I love my country, I love my king. Thou seekest to destroy a city and a mother in Israel. Why wilt thou swallow up the inheritance of the Lord? Why are you doing this? Joab said, Oh, far be it from me to do that. I'm not trying to come in here and destroy your city. Well, you're tearing down the walls. Well, he said, the matter is just not so, but there's a man of Mount Ephraim, Sheba, who's lifted his hand against the king, against David. You deliver him, I'll depart from the city. I'll leave you alone. And the woman said, Behold, his head shall be thrown over to thee over the wall. Listen, don't destroy our city. We've not done anything. We love Israel. We love the king. We support the king. You're coming in here trying to destroy this whole city to get one man. How about you just leave us alone and we'll deliver the man? Well, that'll be fine. Okay, his head's about to come over the wall. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this is one of the wise women. And she says, Save our city. And you'll have old Sheba here in just a second. So, as the text says, the woman says, His head shall be thrown to thee over the wall. And the woman went unto all the people in her wisdom, and they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and cast it out to Joab. And he blew a trumpet, and they retired from the city, every man to his tent. And Joab returned to Jerusalem unto the king. Victorious, right? We've got the head of old Sheba. So what's happened here is David's been put back on the throne, and there's a rebellion going on out there. They thought they were through with the rebellion when they took care of Absalom. But Absalom still has some loyal followers under this fellow named Sheba. Joab and Abishai, after they killed Amasa, kept going north till they found him in this city. And this is a well-fortified city, but before they were allowed to tear down the walls, this woman said, who must have been in a leadership type position, she said, You let me talk to you first and tell you who we are and why this is not a good idea what you're doing. We'll give you who it is that you need. So Joab goes back triumphantly to his king, and Joab once again is over all the host of Israel. You know, sometimes just by necessity you have to appoint certain people to certain positions. David, for whatever reason, didn't always want Joab to be the captain of the host, but Joab did what? He earned it. All right? So he messed up with Amasa. Here is Joab, who went up there and took care of Sheba. And David says, Joab, you've got the job. All right? You're back at being Secretary of Defense again. All right? Well, here's another chapter that's out of chronological order. There was a famine in the days of David for 3 years. And David sought the Lord about this. And the Lord says, well, the famine is because Saul and what he did to the Gibeonites. Now, the Gibeonites, we learn in verse 2 who they are. And it's brought to our attention again as to who they are. Now, Saul was trying to wipe out all the people just like God had told him, but Joshua had made a covenant with these people, the Gibeonites, who are also known as the Hivites. You heard of them before. And so God believes in covenant keeping, right? And therefore, if a covenant was made, you're not going to violate it. God had made a covenant with Saul. David wasn't about to violate it. And David believes in keeping the covenants of God intact. So, these Gibeonites, David asked them, what is it that I can do for you? Wherewith shall I make the atonement, that ye may bless the inheritance of the Lord? And the Gibeonites said, Well, we have no silver nor gold of Saul nor of his house. Neither for us shalt thou kill any man in Israel. And he said, What shall ye say that I will do for you? And they answered, The man that consumed us, and that devised against us, that we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the coast of Israel. He said, Let 7 men of his sons be delivered unto us, and we'll hang them up unto the Lord in Gibeah of Saul. Let's send some men of Saul. Let us take their lives. 7's a complete number. That may have something to do with it. And says, we're going to avenge what Saul did to us by killing his offspring. Now, who did the king spare? You're not giving who? Mephibosheth, right? You're not going to get him. But David went along with this. Yeah, that Saul violated the covenant. And I want peace with you Gibeonites. And they said, you'll have peace with us. But here's what we want. We want to avenge the wrath for what Saul did to our people. So the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, because of the Lord's oath that was between them, between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. Here again, an oath, a covenant, all comes into play, doesn't it? So because Saul was right in wanting to rid the people that were in the land, he was right getting rid of those heathens. But on the other hand, if a covenant had been made with Gibeon, then he needed to respect that. Joshua had made such. And then David says, okay, here's what I'm going to do. You're right. We owe you something. I'm going to turn over to you some descendants, the ones you want from Saul, but not Mephibosheth, because I have an oath I've made with Mephibosheth. And he is to be spared. So, yeah, that's right. 5 sons of Michael. That's right. They belonged to Saul. So, he delivered them into the hands of the Gibeonites, verse 9, and they hanged them in the hill before the Lord, and they fell all 7 together, and were put to death in the days of the harvest, in the first days, in the beginning of barley harvest. Now, he goes on to talk about Rizpah, the daughter of Ai, took sackcloth, spread it upon a rock from the beginning of harvest until the water. She is also likewise showing her allegiance to King David. David went and took the bones of Saul, the bones of Jonathan, his son, from the men of Jabesh Gilead. What's he going to do with them? He's going to bury them in a proper place. There again, he's respecting whom? God and the covenant that he made with Saul. And of course, he loves his friend Jonathan, and he's going to take their bones and bury them in a proper place. The Philistines had taken them as trophies when they had slain Saul in Gilboa, verse 12. He brought up from thence the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan his son, and they gathered the bones of them that were hanged. The bones of Saul, Jonathan his son, were buried in the country of Benjamin, in a place called Zelah, in a sepulchre of Kish's father. That's just good King David doing what is right. Now, look at verse 15. Moreover, the Philistines had yet war again with Israel. Now, David is familiar with these Philistines, isn't he? Because all the way back to his youth, he's known about these Philistines. They were the ones over and over again who were causing problems for the children of Israel, God's people, and they were continually having to fight them. But the Philistines were strong men. They had the military supplies that they needed. They had all of the armaments that were needed. The Philistines had yet war again with Israel. And David went down, his servants with him, and fought against the Philistines, and David waxed faint. Now, notice, here they're fighting giants again. Here's one called Ishbi-Benob. That sounds like a giant. He was the son of the giant. What giant that is, I'm not sure, because there were several giants. There were a lot of giants in the land. David just killed one of them. But Abishai smote a Philistine and killed him, verse 17. And verse 18, it came to pass after this, there was again a battle with the Philistines, a place called Gob, G-O-B, and more giants were killed. And then verse 19, the same thing. The text is there that there was again a battle in Gob with the Philistines, where Elhanan, the son of whoever that is there, a Bethlehemite, slew the brother of Goliath. The New American Standard just says Goliath. And so there's the Gittite. Now, there's a question here as to who this is. The question is, David already killed Goliath, so we know that's done. It's not the same one David killed. It is said that maybe this Elhanan could be another name for David, who could have killed this giant. It could be that this is the brother of Goliath, or just another giant named Goliath. Okay? Well, if Goliath's name was like unto Michael, then it could have been, or James or John, then it could have been just another Goliath. We don't know. But I think what we're learning here in chapter 21 is David's continual victories as God continued to give him the victories. Now, there was yet a battle in Gath, it says. Where was Goliath from? Gath? It says, where a man of great stature had on every hand 6 fingers and every foot 6 toes. That's a big man, a strange-looking man. 24 in number, and he also was born to the giant, or to a giant. And he sounds like a giant. And so when he defied Israel, Jonathan the son of Shimeah, the brother of David, slew him. All right? So this land is filled with these giants, but God's people are overcoming them. Well, we come to chapter 22 as we're nearing the end of the book, and this turns into a great, great, great song of praise. This is not connected to the previous chapters. It's just David's great song of praise. Chapter 23 is going to be David's last song, that the last words of David before he dies. But Psalm 22, let me say just a few things by way of introduction, even as we come to the conclusion of this class. In this particular passage, you will find as you study it, and maybe you'll have opportunity during the next week to read through chapter 22, even chapter 23, and we'll try to cover both those songs next week. They need to be read by the children of God today because of what is said therein. This sounds similar to what we studied in 1 Samuel, the opening chapters, Hannah's great song. It's very similar to Psalm 18, another psalm of David. And there is so much praise in this song. Praise for forgiveness, praise for deliverance. You read this particular hymn and you see the majesty of it, and it also takes you through the various experiences that David had in his life. And when you listen to the lyrics of the song that he wrote, you start thinking, he must have written, these words must be for the time in his life where this happened, you see. And really as you read it for yourself. Read it for yourself. Because you're going to think about your own life, no doubt, when you read it, and you're going to think about those moments when you felt like that the waves were about to overwhelm you, and then your Lord comes to you. All right? Those moments when you felt like you had no defense whatsoever, no fortress, except it be for whom? The Lord Himself. All right? So this is David now having experienced so much in life already, and he bursts forth in a song of praise for his God. Here is the one who's been on my side. It's not been easy. It's not been easy. We've been studying David's life. We know it was not easy. There are things he had to suffer because of what others did to him. He had to suffer because of his own wrongdoing. So he suffered as an innocent man. He suffered as a guilty man. Here is somebody who had to wait on the Lord. He had to wait on the Lord. The monarchy, the kingship didn't come to David at the first part of his life. We remembered when he was anointed, but it was a long time until he ever assumed the throne. He had to do what? Wait on God. Wait on God's timing. So David spake unto the Lord the words of this song. Do we still speak unto the Lord in the words of songs? That's what we do quite regularly, right? Well, we rarely come together that we don't spend some time in expressing our words unto God through song. We're going to do it here in just a few minutes, aren't we? Even if it's here just for a short time of Bible study, let's don't leave until we sing a few hymns and express ourselves through song to the God of heaven. And I want to leave it there because I want to look at this entire chapter next week and look at chapter 23. But I said today to our students in the first year, I have the first year in class, and we're starting this quarter by talking about developing our congregations. And here was the first point I made to them. You can't help develop your congregation unless you're developing first and foremost your relationship to God. Okay? And I gave them 4 what I believe are vital points to developing that relationship. One is simple, just Bible study, meditation on the Scriptures. I said, we the preachers have to be careful that while we're preparing sermons for everybody else, we don't forget about ourselves, right? And I said, do your congregation a favor and do yourself a favor. When you stand in the pulpit and you talk about God's Word, say, here is something we all need, right? You don't hear me just stand up there and say, here's what y'all need to do, right? No, it begins right here, all right? Bible study. Number 2, prayer. Prayer. Here was the third point I made. Learn to develop an appreciation for singing. I was visiting a congregation a number of years ago with Salesian. The person there knew us and came over to us. I don't know, I wasn't preaching. I don't know why I was out of the pulpit that day, but we were visiting. And we learned at this congregation they were having a singing that afternoon. Wonderful. All right? I love to sing. Lady came over quickly. She said, I want to see y'all before I left. She said, she had her Bible. She said, I didn't realize they was having a singing today. She said, I'm going on home. I don't want to just sit here and sing, but I want to see y'all before I left. Evidently, she'd never learned the purpose of singing, as if it's not really going to be a worship period if all you're going to do is sing, right? So I encourage all Christians to learn to appreciate singing, and David obviously did. David did. And some of the psalms that he wrote, fortunately for us, there are those who are more contemporary musicians, have put some of those psalms to music, so we can sing them today. So we're going to be talking about that as we close the book next Wednesday, the Lord willing. Thank you very much.